Hello and welcome to a live deprogram with Keri Smith. I'm your host, Keri, and today is it's a cold Monday in Texas. Now, I know those of you in actually cold places are going to laugh and scoff, but for us, it's very cold. Kevin Anderson in the chat knows what I'm talking about, and we this year, my husband and I finally got the he and I ourselves insulated the attic. Was it this year or last year? I think it was this year. And then we also, at the end of the year, we had some people come and insulate under the house. You may remember that if you've been watching the show for a while, this old house that we're renovating, big, even though we had a heater, we had central heating and air installed. The heating wasn't able to keep anything warm the past couple years because we didn't have insulation, and the everything was escaping through the floors and there was no skirting on the house, and so it was below freezing downstairs, and my dog's water bowl turned to a solid block of ice. And I was doing the shows just with piles of knitting on me because it was in the 30s and you could see your breath downstairs. So this year I'm happy to report the insulation is working. It's not 100%. It's about 56 degrees down here. And this is how I dress at 56 degrees. Sorry, people in actually cold weathers. It's like we're just not made to live in this. That's what I think. But welcome. I'm glad you're here. We're back on our regular time, 2 o'clock Central, live Mondays and Fridays. This is the new time that we're doing to accommodate a couple of gig jobs that I have. So I wanted to say before getting to today's topic, which is kind of a heavy topic, this hat was knit to me years ago by Heather296. Hello, Heather. I still love this hat, especially when it's cold. It covers the ears. I love it. Thank you so much. And this knit top, this was done by Shelly. This is a gorgeous top, and she knit this for me for the Blocked magazine calendar. And you guys can still get one of these if you want to support Blocked magazine, which is the only based knitting and crochet crafting magazine I know of, and it's free. The magazine is free, and it includes all kinds of patterns and designs and articles and commentary on culture and on crafting. And it's put out by Neil James in the UK. You knitted, what do they call him? The woke people hate him. They call him literally Knitler. Just so stupid. If you want to support him, if you want to support Blocked magazine, you can go and pick up a copy of this calendar. It's the Ladies of Blocked magazine calendar for 2025, and it features all of these different designs and different ladies from the based knitting crafting community, and they let me be a part of this and be in this with this sweater that Shelly knit. And you can go pick one of these up and support the only free and based knitting and crochet magazine. Okay, I didn't know I was gonna plug that today, but I got my calendar in the mail and I was excited, and I'm like, okay, we'll talk about it. Yeah, they do. It is clever, right? They're trying to insult him, but it's pretty funny. Literally, Nittler. Sadicus is here on Rumble. We are simulcasting on Rumble. He says, Mom says all the cool people are here on Rumble. I think that's true. And then John says, no, Adam, Little Saint Knit. That's a great one too. Thank you for that. Jean, hey, Texas Sheeply. I love the calendar. Who else is here? John, the Swill, Cynthia. Therese. I'm Miss April, y'all. Should we show it, Therese? Let's see. Since you said I'm in here and you don't mind me showing it, here we go. April, check it out. You got to go pick up a copy of the magazine to have the coolest calendar supporting the coolest magazine in the free world. Super Based is here. Thank you for the membership. Super Base just donated 20 Deprogrammed memberships. I appreciate it so much. A little membership fairy. So if you grab one of those, thank him. Okay. We're getting into a heavy topic today. Cynthia, is there a link you can share? You know what, Therese, if you have time, can you grab the link for the blocked calendar and put it in the chat. I always get there to answer your question for the link. I just go to Blocked Magazine's Instagram because that's the one that Neil is most active on. And then I grab it from there because he has it in the header. Let me see if I can find it. You know what? I found it already. Here we go. It's a link tree called Blocked Magazine. I'm putting in the chat. And Therese, you can also drop it in too if people ask for it. Boom. There we go. You can find the calendar there. But if you want to find Blocked Magazine online, the most popular platform that Neil uses, Cynthia, is Instagram. Yeah, I think he's even got 2 Instagram accounts in case one gets banned because he's got a backup account just in case, in case he can't be saying free people stuff. Yeah, you're welcome, Cynthia. Okay. Oh, and Super Base says, I forgot to say this. I saw this news right before we started. It's such great news. Trudeau is gone. Happy New Year. So Justin Trudeau, that evil, clownish sociopath, has finally resigned. And it's kind of a bittersweet thing. Well, he's resigned as leader of the Labour Party, but also said he's resigning as prime minister once they select someone else, which I think is going to be like March, but he's suspending parliament until then. It's basically he's resigned. But it's kind of bittersweet because some of the Canadians I heard from said, well, he ruined Canada. He instituted all these authoritarian policies surrounding COVID. He called the Freedom Convoy the truckers who were fighting for their right, not to make their own medical decisions for their body. He called them authoritarians. He did all these evil things, and now that it looks like his party is going to face a crushing defeat and he's not going to win, now he just slinks away and quits and doesn't give people the satisfaction of crushing him. But either way, even if he slinks away with his tail between his legs like this, I still think I'm glad that he's gone or going for you guys. I think he's one of the most evil leaders we've seen in my lifetime. Just an absolute sociopath. And I'm so glad you don't have to look at his smug, disgusting, fake face anymore. Whether that's in blackface or dressing up, when he was in India, just a complete snake trying to blend in. Andrew Joyner. Hey, Andrew, thanks for the super chat. Andrew for £5 says, Happy New Year. My contribution towards a new heater. I got to get a little space heater just for this office, I guess, Andrew, until we've insulated under the floor. So until we get around to, I guess, we got to figure out what to do with these old these are like the original windows and stuff. That's where all the heat's escaping now. We'll get there eventually. But you're right. I need a little space heater. I appreciate it. Okay. Nomo says Trudeau, not to mention his outright support of compelled speech. Complete authoritarian tyrant. Keri, also, John says Kamala certified Trump's election. Ooh. I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall for that. Tell us how you really feel about Trump. I can't stand him. Is that obvious? I have so much contempt for this man. Just looking at him makes my skin crawl. Hey, Caro. It's time for Canada Heal. Good to see you. It is time. Gosh, Canada, you got to get your mojo back. You got to get your balls back, Canada. Okay. Today's topic's a heavy one. In many ways, I wasn't looking forward to this, but in other ways I was, because I'm glad this is finally coming out in the open. Elon Musk, say what you will about him, whether you're one of those people who you like him, you don't like him, or you like him, but you're skeptical about some things or whatever. He knows how much power he has in terms of influence, because the media will not leave him alone. The same way they were all over Trump. Even the 4 years Trump wasn't president, they're all over Trump. They're all over Musk. They pay attention to every single thing he tweets. They're constantly looking at him. He is a 24 source of news for them, of content. And so he is using those powers for good. and he did a couple tweets about the grooming gangs in the UK, which has been a problem for years. I say grooming gangs in quotes because these are rape gangs also. That's what they're also doing, is raping. Now that's a word that, having used that word in the artwork for the show and now having used it in the show in like the first 5 minutes or something, there's some rule that means this is going to be demonetized. That's fine. We should be allowed to talk about reality. YouTube, you guys allow all kinds of disgusting content, and we want to talk about the news and about make people aware of terrible things that are happening, and you get punished for it for using words. But that's what it is. These are grooming gangs, these are rape gangs. They've been a problem, a growing problem in the UK for years. On my old channel, I remember we covered this several times. We did some interviews about it with people, because it's happened in so many cities in the UK. It's not just one city. They're dealing with this problem, and it's a problem that's related to immigration. They're dealing with this problem in several cities, and the response from the government, the police, the media has been to stick their head in the sand and to ignore it. And I remember years ago when I first covered this, some of the reports that were coming out that you could find that they had done independent investigations of the police mishandling these things. They found evidence that the police were saying, well, they weren't pursuing things because they didn't want to appear racist. Do you guys remember this? It was like outright admitted that they weren't pursuing convictions and trying to bust these things up because they didn't want to appear racist against migrants. Because the people doing this, a large percentage of them are Pakistani, not all, of course, but Pakistani, Muslim. These are Muslim rape gangs, and they're immigrants. And now, finally, because Elon Musk said something, this is one of these things that's just sort of, I just resign myself to. I guess nobody cares. The media is never going to cover it. The government, until the people in the UK stand up and say enough is enough, this is just going to keep going on. But Elon Musk tweeted about it, and because they scrutinize everything he tweets, it became a big story. So much so that the prime minister is now having to respond in the media to Elon Musk and defend himself. And I don't know if you've seen the latest round of headlines, but it says stuff like UK prime minister defends his record on grooming gangs. When you have to say that, you've lost the battle. It was a great move on Elon Musk's part, because now this guy's had to answer the question. Like, now it's in a headline. It doesn't matter if you're saying defend your record on what? Oh, on grooming gangs? Okay, you've lost the PR battle, which is great. Let's look at a couple of articles that just came out. Now everyone's covering it. All these years later, everyone's covering it. Here's one. This is from the Free Press. The biggest peacetime crime and cover-up in British history. By the way, this is about thousands of young girls who've been kidnapped, groomed, turned into sex slaves, basically. Underage girls. We're talking about girl. When I say girl, I'm not using that word the way that us older people use it about young adults. I'm talking about children. The biggest peacetime crime and cover-up in British history. And you can see there Britain's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, during a meeting, looking like a goof. Okay, let's read a little bit of this. And now those of you who are maybe in the bubble I used to be in, if you're in the woke bubble or the mainstream bubble, the leftist bubble, you're not even aware of this. This is probably the first time you've heard about it, because suddenly all of the media is covering it and it's reaching you in your little bubble, your echo chamber, where you only hear things that the mainstream news covers. So welcome. We're going to read through some of this so you can just get an idea of the scope of this. And it's not just one city. London, the grooming and serial rape of thousands of English girls by men of mostly Pakistani Muslim background over several decades is the biggest peacetime crime in the history of modern Europe. It went on for many years. It is still going on. And there has been no justice for the vast majority of the victims. British governments, both Conservative and Labour, hoped that they had buried the story after a few symbolic prosecutions in the 2010s. And it looked like they had succeeded until Elon Musk read some of the court papers and tweeted his disgust and bafflement on X over the new year. Britain now stands shamed before the world. The public's suppressed wrath is bubbling to the surface in petitions, calls for a public inquiry, and demands for accountability. Finally, the scandal is already reshaping British politics. It's not just about the heinous nature of the crimes. It's that every single level of the British system is implicated in the cover up. Social workers were intimidated into silence. Local police ignored, excused, and even abetted pedophile rapists across dozens of cities. Senior police and home office officials deliberately avoided action in the name of maintaining what they called, quote, community relations. Community relations. That's them being cowards and not wanting to say anything negative about immigrants, Muslim immigrants, all these people coming across the border with different values, different culture. Local councillors and members of parliament rejected pleas for help from the parents of raped children. Charities, NGOs, and Labour MPs accused those who discussed the scandal of racism and Islamophobia. Isn't that just a treat? That's exactly why the police in a lot of these cities covered it up. And this was uncovered during some of the inquiries where the police were saying they didn't investigate, they didn't prosecute, they didn't pursue charges because they were afraid of being called racists or Islamophobes. That's insane. You're going to ignore the rape of children, the systemic rape, abduction of children, because you're afraid of a bad name that somebody's going to call you. And if it weren't true, why do you care? If it's not true, why do you care? The media mostly ignored or downplayed the biggest story of their lifetimes. Yeah, and when the media did cover it, which we'll probably see in some of these articles I've pulled, but it's pretty new for them to openly and explicitly call it Muslim rape gangs, or to call it Arab, or to call it immigrant, or to call it Pakistani, because all of the old coverage from the 2010s, whenever there was a story reported on it at any point, they called it, you know what they called it? They called it Asian. They called it Asian, which paints a very different picture in your mind, doesn't it? It's like a bait and switch. It's a little magic trick they did. They didn't want you to think Muslim, Arab, Pakistani. The media mostly ignored or downplayed the biggest story of their lifetimes. Zealous in their incuriosity, much of Britain's media elite remained barnacled to the bubble of Westminster politics and its self-serving priorities. They did this to defend a failed model of multiculturalism. And you know, it's not just the UK. The rest of Europe is going to be dealing with this too. They're already dealing with it. They're already dealing with the failed model of multiculturalism and the problem of open borders. They did this to defend a failed model of multiculturalism and to avoid asking hard questions about failures of immigration policy and assimilation. They did this because they were afraid of being called racist or Islamophobic. They did this because Britain's traditional class snobbery has fused with the new snobbery of political correctness. All of which is why no one knows precisely how many thousands of young girls were raped in how many towns across Britain since the 1970s. What we do know is that the epicenter was the post-industrial mill towns of England's North and Midlands, where immigrants from Pakistan and Bangladesh settled in the 1960s. White locals say the grooming and rapes began soon after. In Rotherham, this is one of the ones that I previously covered, one of the worst. In Rotherham, the rundown Yorkshire city where the scandal first broke, local police and councillors were notified about systematic grooming and sex abuse. By 2001, 24 years ago, the first convictions did not occur until 2010, when 5 men of Pakistani background were jailed for multiple offenses against girls as young as 12 years of age. These men targeted the most vulnerable girls, the poor, the fatherless, children in care homes, with candy, food, taxi rides, and drugs. They raped the girls, passed them around family and friendship networks, pimped them out into similar networks in other cities, then discarded them as they reached the age of consent. So as they aged out, you understand this at the age of consent, at what point they're actually legally able to consent, too old for these child rape gangs. This pattern was repeated in as many as 50 cities across the country. It's just staggering, isn't it? Including leafy Oxford and liberal Bristol. A 2014 inquiry estimated that 1,400 girls had been serially raped in Rotherham alone. The details are established beyond doubt in the small number of prosecutions that eventually made it to court. The suffering described in the court papers is sickening to read. The girls were drugged, beaten, sodomized, gang raped, trafficked, and tortured. One night in Oldham in 2006, for example, a 12-year-old girl named Sophie entered a police station and reported that she had just been molested in a graveyard by a man named Ali. A desk officer told her to come back with an adult when she was sober. 2 men accosted her in the police station. Joined by a third, they raped her in their car. They took her out of the police station and did this in the car. When they dumped her on the street, she asked a man named Sarwar Ali for directions. He took her to his home. He then raped her and gave her money for bus fare home. A man named Shakil Chowdhury pulled up in his car and offered to take her home. He abducted her and took her to her house where he and 4 other men then repeatedly raped her. This is the kind of paragraph that if you haven't been reading about this stuff before, it's like the first time I remember a few years ago when I first covered this on a show, it was just it's hard to fathom. It's hard to believe it's real because it's just so egregious and vile and over the top, and the fact that this could happen in the modern age in a Western country and nothing's done about it and nobody cares. It boggles. Like if you made a movie like this, I think people would struggle. They'd say that's not believable that nobody's doing anything about it. There's thousands of stories like this. There are stories like this where they would arrest the minor and not the men. They would arrest the child for public intoxication after these men drugged and violated her. The police did nothing. Several girls were murdered. In Manchester in 2003, Victoria Agaglia was repeatedly drugged and raped before being given a fatal dose of heroin at the age of 15. In Blackpool the same year, 14-year-old Charlene Downs disappeared. Her body was never found. In Telford, this is one of the ones I covered previously, Azhar Ali Mahmood groomed Lucy Lowe from the age of 12, impregnated her at 14. He burned her alive in her own home with her mother, her disabled sister, and her unborn second child, also fathered by him. He was jailed for life in 2001 for murder, not for the sex crimes. In the age of say her name, no one important thought it worth saying the names of these girls. The girls their rapists told them were, quote, white slags, worthless and expendable. Apart from a few whistleblowers, most of them women, and courageous journalists such as Julie Bendel, Andrew Norfolk, Douglas Murray, and Charlie Peters, the media showed no interest. Why? Because this was the wrong kind of racially motivated crime committed by the wrong kind of criminal. What does that mean? I can tell you what it means in woke speak. I can tell you what it means in this modern age where woke ideology, my old ideology, social justice ideology reigns. It's the dominant belief system. It's the dominant religion. It's the dominant religion in the UK, just like it is in the US right now. And in this evil, upside down, racist belief system, religion, ideology, whatever you want to call it, they have brainwashed people and convinced them that it's impossible to be racist towards white people. That racism, they've redefined racism to say racism equals prejudice plus power. I'm sure you've heard this by now. In 2016, 2017, when I first started talking about this ideology that I had been in for so long, there weren't as many people in the mainstream who had heard this yet, but I'm sure you've all heard it by now. I'm sure you've all had some clueless, moronic, well-meaning, but idiotic mom in some mom's group or someone in a hobby group or at your work who's said this to you, like they just learned it and they're teaching it to you. Did you know that racism equals prejudice plus power? Because they've brainwashed people in this way and they've tried to redefine words the way that cults do, they've convinced people that it's impossible to be racist towards white people. So therefore, this is the wrong kind of crime for the media, who's also indoctrinated into this religion, to report on. Because they don't care about racially motivated crimes against white people. In fact, they say those don't exist. They can't exist. It's impossible because racism equals prejudice, again, prejudice plus power. And they certainly, in this religion, woke religion, they don't believe that it's possible for people of color, as they call it, to be racist. And since the perpetrators here are immigrants, they are of color, and they're Muslim. These are all groups that in the woke religion get put into the oppressed group category. It is impossible for the oppressed group to be perpetrators, to be offenders, to be oppressors. That's what this stupid belief system teaches people. So they ignore stuff like this on purpose. It's evil. The wrong kind of racially motivated crime committed by the wrong race, the wrong religion of criminal. Yeah, that's exactly why they ignored it. The majority of the victims were white, plus some Sikhs. The majority of their abusers were of Pakistani and Bangladeshi Muslim extraction. The majority of their crimes were committed in cities with a Labour Party. So these leftist cities, right? Controlled council and a Labour Party MP who needed Muslim votes. This led to institutional racism of the inverted kind. Here's what's so funny. They have to say inverted kind. Why, free press? Why? Why give in to them? It's not institutional racism inverted. It's just institutional racism. Don't accept any of their premises. Don't accept their premise. Don't play their stupid game. This is like when leftists say to me sometimes, or like about a story like this, they'll say, well, that's awful that that happened, but that's not racism, even though they were targeting white girls. That's not racism because racism equals prejudice plus power. And they'll say, and what you're trying to argue is that it's reverse racism and that doesn't exist. And what I usually say is, hey, we finally agree on something. Reverse racism doesn't exist. There's no such thing as reverse racism. There's just racism. Racism isn't defined by, which way it goes from what race to what race. That's in your messed up, stupid belief system. There's just racism. There's just, in this case, actual institutional racism. Actual institutional racism. They use that phrase all the time incorrectly. This is racism that was supported, ignored, abetted by the institutions that were set up to prevent and to prosecute these crimes. How much more institutional can you get than that? And that it says this led to institutional racism of the inverted kind. Now, I'll just say institutional racism, and that enabled the perpetrators to do as they liked. The system itself became corrupted. Welfare workers admit that they failed to report these crimes because the police told them that they would be accused of being racist. We got a lot of cowards walking around pretending to be adults. pretending to be men and women. Adult cowards. I just can't fathom being, you're at the end of your life and you're looking back at what you did over your life, and it's like, well, you're weighing things out on those scales of right and wrong and good and evil, and you're like, there's, on the one hand, there were all these child rapes, but it was a worse thing. It would have been a worse thing for someone to incorrectly call me racist. So it's better that I ignored all of that and let those rapes keep happening, those rapes and murders of children. What kind of person is that? It's disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. Whenever you hear people say, oh, they call something a conspiracy theory, like a Kennedy assassination, right? If you don't believe the official story, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. And they say, well, if something else had happened, it would have required too many people to be involved to cover that up. Here's your example. Here's your case study. We're talking about thousands, with an S, many, many thousands of young girls who for decades were being kidnapped, raped, tortured, in some cases murdered. And the police did nothing. The media did nothing. The politicians did nothing. How many people were involved? How many social workers, how many welfare workers were involved who admit that they were a part of it? Why? Fear. That's all you needed to introduce. To have all these people involved. Fear. Ego. Their ego was more important. I don't want someone to call me racist. I don't want to lose my job. I'm just going to let this happen. Anyway, I there are so many heads that need to roll in the UK over this. And not just in the police stations and the social workers, the politicians, but the media. The leader of one rape gang in Oldham, Shabir Ahmed, worked for the local council. He worked for the local council as a welfare rights officer and ran his gang from the council welfare office. Another member was on the Oldham Youth Council. In multiple cases, local Labor politicians of Pakistani background interfered with police inquiries. In Telford in 2016, 10 members of the Labor Council wrote to the Home Secretary, the Conservatives' Amber Rudd, claiming that allegations of abuse were, quote, sensationalized. It's just sensationalized. And that there was no need for action. 2 years later, an investigation by the Sunday Mirror newspaper counted some 1,000 victims. That was one of the big news article, one of the exceptions. And I think that was the one, yes, in 2018 that I previously, on my old channel that we covered, the Sunday Mirror inquiry. The superintendent of the West America Regional Police significantly disputed the figures and said the Mirror had sensationalized the issue. The police were in no hurry to inquire. Senior police repeatedly denied that there even was a problem, then denied its obvious racial and religious elements. Government and police agreed that regardless of which party is in power, the peace and multicultural mass migration Britain depends on, quote, community relations. So they basically were saying it depends on community relations. And the unsaid part is it depends on us allowing them to continue to kidnap and rape and torture and sometimes murder children. The law-abiding public's alarm about the consequences of mass immigration is suppressed, stigmatized by the political class and the press as the racism of a chimerical far right. We're used to this. If you're in this chat, if you've been here for a while, you're used to this. They call everybody far right. They call everybody racist. They call progressives, hippies, they call classical liberals, libertarian. They call everybody far right and racist. This is more destruction of language that cults do. It's attempted manipulation. It's an attempt to use fear to control people, which apparently they were very successful at doing in the UK. For the Labour Party specifically, quote, community relations means cultivating urban Muslim voters. Nazar Afzal, who was chief crown prosecutor for northwestern England between 2011 and 2015, claims that in 2008, the Home Office advised police not to prosecute grooming gang cases. Don't prosecute them. Why? Quote, because the girls had made an informed choice about their sexual behavior, end quote. We're talking about children, 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 11-year-olds. It's not possible for them to consent. The laws do not support this idea that they are making an informed choice. And in the cases where, I mean, they clearly went into police stations and told you what happened, that they were assaulted. That was their informed choice, though, those kids. In late December 2024, Jess Phillips, the Home Office's Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, refused requests from the Oldham City Council for a government-led inquiry into the institutional failure and corruption that had made the Oldham cases possible. The only thing Phillips is safeguarding is her seat. You got to give it up for this Free Press article. It's bringing the truth. This is, by the way, this is why Elon Musk started tweeting about this. This is how it came to his attention, was Oldham. Was the Home Office minister saying, and look at her title. This is a woman who sits on, her title is Home Office's Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls. And they say, hey, can we have an inquiry into the institutional failure and corruption that made Oldham possible, into what happened in Oldham? And she says, no, that's very Orwellian, isn't it? Violence against women and girls, protecting violence against women and girls. The Conservatives were not much better. In 2019, shortly before he became Conservative leader and Prime Minister, Boris Johnson complained that money spent on investigating historic child abuse crimes was money spaffed up a wall. In 2020, Johnson's Home Office suppressed the Conservatives' own research on grooming gangs. Releasing it, they said, was, quote, not in the national interest, end quote. Elon Musk has changed the Conservatives' political interests. So their new leader, Kemi Badenoch, is now calling for an inquiry. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is caught between his party, his voters, and should he find them, his principles. Gosh, give it up for this writer. As director of the Crown Prosecution Service, or CPS, between 2008 and 2013, Starmer secured some successful convictions against rape gangs. But Starmer and his lawyers also failed to bring other major cases to court. In 2009, the Starmer-led CPS dropped its prosecution of a grooming and rape gang in Rochdale, despite having DNA evidence and hours of testimony on video. When Nazar Afzal started working as a Crown prosecutor in 2011, one of his first actions was to reopen the case and reverse the CPS's decision. In 2012, Afzal secured the convictions of 9 men, 8 of them of Pakistani background and 1 of Afghan background. Afterwards, he said that, quote, white professionals' oversensitivity to political correctness and fear of appearing racist may well have contributed to justice being stalled. So many cowards. Just little weasel snake cowards. It's almost like they gravitate to government jobs. Starmer admitted that, quote, particularly in cases involving groups, there's clearly an issue of ethnicity that has to be understood and addressed. But he insisted that the failure to prosecute had been caused by a lack of understanding about the victims, a credibility issue. It is now Starmer who has a credibility issue. Maggie Oliver, the Manchester-based detective who helped to expose the abuse in Rochdale, says that Starmer is as guilty as anyone I know for the institutional failure to protect some of Britain's most vulnerable children. Starmer has yet to address the Labour Party's historic role in this mess or his own record of triangulating complicity. He has yet to say whether he agrees with his minister, Jess Phillips, that there should be no national inquiry. But now that Musk has said the unsayable about the unspeakable, there is no going back. Starmer's lawyerly equivocations look like what they are, covering the party's backside at the expense of justice for the victims. Announcing another inquiry will not be enough to pacify the British public, nor will it reduce the popularity of Nigel Farage and his Reform UK party. Their main appeal is that they say what no one else dares to. The entire British system has become morally bankrupt. Ironically enough, Musk calls for Farage to step down. Musk says he doesn't have what it takes. And it says that's likely to take the pressure off of Starmer. No justice, no peace is a common slogan among the activist class that chose not to act against the rape gangs. There will be no peace in Britain until the full truth is known, the law is restored, and bureaucracies are held to account, and rule by community relations is reversed. The Labour government will do its utmost to do its least. Pressure from Musk has already done what the outrage of the beaten down British people cannot do. Musk has shamed the British government into explaining itself. Next, it must be forced to act. This is just a great article from the Free Press. Again, I love this line. Musk has shamed the British government into explaining itself. That's what I meant about the prime minister in headlines now having to say defend himself on grooming gangs. This piece, by the way, who wrote this? Dominic Green. It's a great piece. Let's see. I'm going to take just a second before we get into another one of these with more details. And again, I told you today's a heavy topic, but it's just good. This is finally getting sunlight. This is finally getting international sunlight. And no matter what you think of him, these people always, I don't like everything Musk does either, but I'm not one of these brainwashed EMDS, EMDS, Elon Musk derangement syndrome people. These leftists who just go along with whatever the cult does, and suddenly they hate Elon Musk and they don't even know why. They just think he's always an evil person. It's like, hey, step back for a second. Do you think this might be a good thing that he did, drawing attention to this? Can you not admit that? Can you be a human being and be a normal person and look at this and say, yeah, I'm glad I used his influence and his power and his knowledge that the media scrutinizes everything he says and does to draw attention to this. That's a good thing. If you can't admit that, there's something wrong with you. Kevin Anderson, thank you. Thank you for being here today, Kevin. Kevin gifted 10 Deprogrammed memberships. If you guys got one of those, give him a thanks. I appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you for supporting the channel. Torgo the White is saying what we're all thinking. Member for 8 months, Torgo. He says, brother, get the flamer, the heavy flamer. Yeah. And not just for the grooming gangs, right? That's how I feel about all these bureaucrats, all the people in the media, the government, the police, the social workers who just covered this up for decades. That's how I feel about them too. They have a lot on their conscience, or they should. Jamie, hey Jamie, thanks for the $3 super chat. Jamie says people who do that to children are demonic and wicked. I couldn't agree more. We fight, what is that verse about? We fight against powers and principalities. There's a lot of that right now. Simon says, with all due respect, we don't need another inquiry. There's been many over 30 years. The conclusions are the same and are not implemented. What would you suggest, Simon? I don't know if there, I mean, in Oldham, I don't think there's been an inquiry yet. I think there should be. But in addition, I think there should be more than that. Like you said, they're not implementing a lot of the conclusions. What do you think should happen? Because I think there need to be trials. There need to be people who not only lose their job, but are prosecuted for their criminal negligence, for not doing their job, for knowing about this and not doing anything. Eric Heffelfinger for $10. Thank you, Eric, for supporting Deprogram. Eric says, it's odd how the anti-racists assume an investigation into assault gangs means black and brown people are the only perpetrators. Yeah, it is. But they know that in this case, it's true. And that's bad optics. And that doesn't fit with the belief system they want everyone to subscribe to. So there can't be accountability. You can't cover it. You can't have sunlight on it. You can't stop it, because if you were to do so, then it's acknowledging reality, and reality doesn't fit with their belief system. Dion says some cultures are better than others. Yes, they are. If you spent any time in the left cult like I did, if you're a classical liberal and you're slowly coming out of that cult, and or maybe you've been out of it for a little bit, and something like this phrase bothers you, you should think about why, because that's part of your programming. There's nothing wrong with saying this. It's true. It's observably true. Some cultures are better than others. We tend to use that word culture. We don't have our vocabulary is not as large as some cultures, as sometimes in history, as some languages. Uh, for example, I mean, how many words did the Greeks have for love? But because the love I have for pizza is different than the love I have for my husband, but we use the same word for both. They had many different words to differentiate between these different kinds of love. And culture is one of those words that it has almost two meanings if you think about it. And there's the more innocuous, benign meaning of culture, which is we think of things like if you're going to a culture fest, right? You think of things like food and music, costumes, dress, things like that. And so there's this part of you that might be a part of you if you spent any time on the left where you're like, well, how can you say that one kind of cultural food is different than another kind of cultural food? That's just a matter of opinion. Yes, I grant you that. I'm not talking about that. That's not the definition of culture I'm talking about. That's not what Dion's talking about. If I'm going to tell you that pizza is better than tacos, or tacos is better than pizza, I'm probably doing it in jest, or I'm just stating a preference or an opinion. That's not the culture we're talking about. We're talking about culture when it's used to mean values, morals, ethics, a way of living. Some cultures do not value consent of women, of children. Some cultures think it's okay to throw gay people off of rooftops. Some cultures think it's okay to make a woman wear something over her entire body. I'm not talking about a headscarf. I'm talking about the burqa, the ones where she looks like a mailbox and there's just a little tiny slot that you put the mail in, but it's where her eyes are. Like, some cultures think that's okay to do to women. Some cultures haven't learned that raping is wrong. So yes, if this bothers you, if this phrase bothers you, some cultures are better than others, I would say you need to do some deprogramming around that. There's nothing objectively wrong or offensive or awful about that statement. It's a true statement. Just like some values are better than others, some morals are better than others objectively. Yes, Lindsay, some cultures are okay with child brides. I want to pull up an older article. Let me see. Um, this one. This is from 2 years ago. This one's about Telford. Let me show you this one. Now, there's a lot of new ones I've got pulled up because, again, the media is finally covering it. There's so many we can read about now, but I just want to show you one from a couple years ago where even 2 years ago they had identified, and further back than that, I remember in 2018 when I covered this, they were already saying, well, yeah, they're not doing anything about it because they're afraid of being called racist. They're afraid of criticizing immigrants. So this is an article from the BBC from 2022. Telford child sex abuse inquiry. Abuse suspects disregarded over racism fears. Even the BBC did an article on this 2 years ago. One of these rare articles that nobody cared about. The government did nothing. Police failed. Now here you can see what I mentioned earlier. Up until this recent discussion of these grooming gangs, up until the very recent discussion in the past week, the media in the UK consistently, when they did cover it, if they did cover it, they would call these men Asian, which conjures up something very different than what they are, right? Um, and you can see that throughout this article. Police failed to properly target South Asian men over child sex crimes because it would have been, quote, too politically incorrect, an inquiry heard. An investigation into child sexual exploitation in Telford also heard officers, quote, drop the case like a hot potato when complaints were made against these suspects. West Merca Police in Telford and Wrekin County apologized for failings. In his report, Inquiry Chair Tom Crowther, QC, said the majority of suspects of child sex crimes in Telford during the period he examined were men of Southern Asian heritage. However, do you see how they use this technicality here of like Southern A? But they know that's conjuring up something different in your mind than if they were to say Muslim, Arabic, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Afghani immigrants. However, evidence was repeatedly ignored by both the police and council, he said, with the police in particular nervous about areas seen as, quote, Asian areas. Quote, a street was regarded as a no-go area for police. No-go. This was in several of the inquiries they uncovered this, that the police had certain areas they wouldn't even go to where they knew these things were happening and they would not respond to calls there. The street was regarded as a no-go area for police, which is obviously an appalling failure, he said, branding it a dereliction of the police's most basic duty to leave certain streets unpatrolled. That very street was reported in the local press in the late 90s, 1990s. 30 years in the making. It was reported in the local press in the late 1990s as having a child prostitution problem, and yet it was a no-go area. It was a no-go area because it had a child prostitution problem. In one case highlighted in the report, inappropriate behavior by a South Asian male towards a child was discussed at multi-agency meetings in the early 2000s, but no action was taken, according to evidence given to the inquiry. One witness said police appeared, quote, frightened to question or challenge, because they didn't want to have the finger pointed at them saying they were being racist, end quote. Cowards. Cowards for police officers. Operation Chalice, a far reaching police investigation, saw 7 men, mainly of Pakistani heritage, jailed in 2012 on charges including rape and trafficking. At the time, police said as many as 100 girls may have been targeted by that gang. The inquiry suggested a disastrous council decision in 2006, way back in 2006, to suspend taxi licensing enforcement was also born entirely out of fear of accusations of racism. These events happened while council safeguarding staff they were aware of taxi drivers offering children free rides for sex, it added. Ah. Do you know what the UK police have been spending their time on in the era of woke? They've been turning a blind eye to these child sex trafficking rings because they're committed. They're run by Muslim, Arabic, immigrant men, mostly Pakistani, but also Afghani, Bangladeshi, from other countries. But they've turned a blind eye to this purposefully. But do you know what they've been spending time on? I'm sure you guys, if you're in the chat and you're regulars, you've seen this. But if you're in the bubble and you're here and you found your way here, let me tell you, you can look these articles up too. These are the kind of things the UK police have been doing the past few years. They've been arresting people for tweets. They've been taking time, taxpayer money, to go to people's homes and knock on the door and say, you're going to have to come with us for questioning because your tweets made someone feel bad. Because on Twitter, you said that men are not women. That's what the woke. Welcome to policing and a woke, authoritarian, totalitarian big brother state. Where the job of police officers has changed to one of enforcing this woke moral code in violation of people's liberty, their freedom of speech, their freedom of thought. It's enforcing this religion, woke religion, and turning a blind eye to actual violent, repulsive crimes against children for fear of being called racist by those in the same religion as them, the woke religion. West Merca Police said the force now had teams dedicated to preventing and tackling child exploitation. Telford and Wrecking Council said it was already carrying out many of the inquiry's recommendations. Mr. Crowther said it was important that people across the country did not see Telford as an example of bad practices which did not exist elsewhere. Is that your defense? Don't worry. It's not just Telford. It's all these other towns and cities in the UK too. Don't worry. We're all ignoring child exploitation. Quote, my view is this problem is likely universal to a greater or lesser extent, and anyone thinking it can't happen in my town is wrong, he said. I guess that makes it okay. Is that what he's arguing? It's not, hey, it wasn't just us. I've got an article here from the Telegraph. This is one of the new ones. Even the Telegraph is covering it now. How the grooming gang scandal was covered up. The child victims of rape were denied justice and protection from the state to preserve the image of a successful multicultural society. Did you ever think you would see this being covered in the mainstream media this way, to this extent? Again, this is because of Elon. Thank goodness. Using that extreme focus and scrutiny that the press has on him and turning it against them to force them to respond to this, to report about it. This is an article from 2 days ago. Oh no, sign up to read this. I did sign up. Hold on. Let me just log in here. I do want to read this, and this is a good one that I already read, and you guys bear with me. Thank you. Thank you for being here for a really hard topic, too. Okay. Here we go. Safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips' decision to block a public inquiry. Now, again, this is the Oldham case, and blocking the public inquiry in Oldham is what brought this to Elon Musk's attention, which led to him tweeting about this, which is why the whole thing has been blown open in all of these different towns and cities. And suddenly, this is finally the focus of the media attention, which is forcing it to be the focus of the government's attention, which should have happened years and years and years ago. But at least this is finally happening. So, safeguarding Minister Jess Phillips' decision to block a public inquiry into the Oldham grooming gangs seems from the outside to be almost inexplicable. Children were raped and abused by gangs of men while the authorities failed to protect them. A review of the abuse in Oldham was released in 2022, but its terms of reference only stretched from 2011 to 2014, so just 3 years. Survivors from the town said that they wanted a government-led inquiry to cover a longer period and to catch what the previous review had missed. In Jess Phillips' letter to the council, revealed by GB News, she said she understood the strength of feeling in the town, but thought it best for another local review to take place. This is a scandal that should be rooted out entirely and investigated by the full might of the British state. Voices ranging from Elon Musk to Kemi Badenoch have joined the calls for an inquiry. Yet the government seems curiously reluctant to dig into the failings of officials. I wonder why that is. I wonder how many people in the government are to blame here. And maybe there were people in the government who, as we know, there were people in the government who knew about it and covered it up and ignored it, and who stopped police inquiry in some cases. But could it be that there were people in the government who enjoyed, visiting these sex rings, these child sex rings? This reluctance is not new. Across the country, in towns and cities, on our streets, and in the state institutions designed to protect the most vulnerable members of our society, authorities deliberately turned a blind eye to horrific abuse of largely white children by gangs of men, predominantly of Pakistani heritage. Over time, details have come to light about abuse in Rotherham, in Telford, in Rochdale, and in dozens of other places. But with the stories released in dribs and drabs and the details so horrific as to be almost unreadable. That's one of the problems too. Because YouTube is so censorious, because our social media is so censorious. Now, do you think, if you're in the leftist bubble, do you think that it's just a coincidence that you're not able to report on the most egregious crimes without getting demonetized, and in some cases having your videos removed? Or do you think that's by design? The details so horrific as to be almost unreadable, the full scale of the scandal has still to reach the public. The following paragraph makes for difficult reading, but you should read it if you can. It's drawn from Judge Peter Rook's 2013 sentencing of Mohammed Karar in Oxford. Mohammed prepared his victim, quote, for gang anal rape by using a pump. You subjected her to a gang rape by 5 or 6 men. At one point, she had 4 men inside her. A red ball was placed in her mouth to keep her quiet." End quote. Her story is horrific. It is also far from unique. It's not unique. Take Anna from Bradford. Vulnerable and in residential care at the age of 14, she had made repeated reports of rape, abuse, and coercion. When she, quote, married her abuser in a traditional Islamic wedding, her social worker attended the ceremony. Her social worker attended this sham marriage of this 14-year-old to her rapist in a traditional Islamic wedding. Her social worker went. The authorities then arranged for her to be fostered by her husband's parents, by her rapist parents. She became a foster child because she's still a child. In Telford, Lucy Lowe died at 16 alongside her mother and sister when her abuser set fire to her home in 2000. She had just given birth to Azhar Ali Mahmoud's child when she was just 14 and was pregnant when she was killed. Her death was subsequently used to threaten other children. The Telford inquiry found particularly brutal threats. When one victim, aged 12, told her mother, and the mother called the police, quote, "There was about 6 or 7 Asian men who came to my house. They threatened my mom, saying they'll petrol bomb my house if we don't drop the charges." End quote. Yet, in a pattern that would repeat itself, Telford's authorities looked the other way. When an independent review was finally published in 2022, it found police officers described parts of the town as no-go areas, while witnesses set out multiple allegations of police corruption and favoritism towards the Pakistani community. Wow, that sounds like institutional racism. Regardless of the reason, the inquiry found that, quote, "there was a nervousness about race, bordering on a reluctance to investigate crimes committed by what was described as the Asian community." Similar concerns applied at the council, where anxieties over appearing racist saw safeguarding officers waving away concerns simply because the perpetrators were Asian. But I should be in quotes, Asian. It was felt that some suspects were not investigated because it would have been, quote, "politically incorrect." How many hundreds of thousands, if not millions, how many millions of victims of woke ideology are there now? Because all of these girls and their families who suffered, all of them are victims of woke ideology. Woke ideology is what kept the police officers quiet, prevented the police officers from doing their job. Woke ideology is what kept the media quiet. It's what kept the social workers quiet. This one girl's social worker going to her marriage to her abuser when she was 14. Woke ideology is what allowed all of this to happen. It's what ushered it in. And this is just one area of woke ideology. You know, we've covered the child abuse that happens in the name of gender affirming care, which is also, those are also victims of woke ideology. It's just amazing. Okay, so similar concerns apply to the council, where anxieties over appearing racist saw safeguarding officers waving away concerns simply because the perpetrators were Asian. It was felt that some suspects were not investigated because it would have been, quote, "politically incorrect," end quote. This is not to say that the council did nothing. Aware that taxi drivers were offering children rides for sex, in 2006, it suspended licensing enforcement for drivers, allowing high-risk drivers to continue practicing. So, you like how there's this little tongue-in-cheek thing here they do here where they're like, "It's not as if they did nothing. Oh, they did something all right. They made it easier for these taxi drivers to continue abducting and raping children by suspending licensing enforcement. As the Telford inquiry found, this was, quote, born entirely out of fears of accusations of racism. It was craven. And above all, there was the concern over community relations. Senior council staff were terrified that the abuse of children, quote, had the potential to start a race riot, end quote. Well, I guess you better just let it keep happening then, right? Is that your thinking? That's insane. You think there's not going to be race riots now? You think covering it up, trying to cover it up and ignore it and let it keep going on for decades and decades is going to reduce tensions? The result was stasis, despite officials acknowledging it in at least one case that abuse by Asian, quote, Asian men had gone on for years and years. It had. At least 1,000 girls were abused in the town between 1980 and 2009. Again, we're just talking about one town here. Yet, and there's over 50 towns where this was happening. Hundreds of thousands of girls. Yet even this conservative estimate was disputed by authority figures, with West America Police Superintendent Tom Harding insisting in 2018 that the figure was, quote, sensationalized. The independent review later found that it was entirely plausible, of course, that it was 1,000 girls. Denial about the extent of the problem is rooted deep in Britain's political system. At times, it appears that the government's approach to multiculturalism is not to uphold the law, but instead to minimize the risk of unrest between communities. Confronted with gangs of predominantly Pakistani men targeting predominantly white children, the state knew exactly what to do. For the good of community relations, it had to bury the story. In Rotherham, a senior police officer told a distressed father that the town, quote, would erupt if the routine abuse of white children by Pakistani heritage men became public knowledge. One parent, concerned about his missing daughter, was told by the police that a, quote, older Asian boyfriend was a fashion accessory for young girls in the town. The father of a 15-year-old rape victim was told that the assault might mean that she would learn her lesson. These are things the police were saying. The ordeal had been so brutal that she required surgery. As the 2014 Jay inquiry into Rotherham found, children were doused, quote, doused in petrol and threatened with being set afire, threatened with guns. They witnessed brutally violent rapes and were threatened that they would be the next victim if they told anyone. Girls as young as 11 years old were raped by large numbers of male perpetrators, one after the other, end quote. In the same town, a senior police officer allegedly said that the abuse had been, quote, going on for 30 years. 30 years. Adding, with it being Asians, we can't afford for this to be coming out. End quote. As Louise Casey's 2015 report on Rotherham Council found, this attitude was widespread. The Pakistani community accounted for around 3% of the town's population, and the story emerging was clear. Pakistani men were grooming white girls. As a result, one witness said the council was, quote, terrified of the impact on community cohesion. Do you see how misplaced their concerns are here? Top to bottom, the government, the police officers, the city councils, the social workers, the media, all of it. They're all concerned, first and foremost, about making sure that they are not ever called a racist incorrectly. They are so concerned with community relations, community cohesion, They're so concerned with protecting the idea of multiculturalism. They hear this story about, they're like, "Yeah, this has, been going on for 30 years." The systematic abduction, rape, and torture and grooming of children, and we really can't afford for it to do you think this person might be about to say continue happening? No, we really can't afford for this to come out. Where are your priorities? And by the way, hiding something like this is it absolutely, absolutely makes race relations worse. It makes things worse. It makes community cohesion worse. You're not making it better because you're not addressing it and you're not putting a stop to it and you're not doing your job and you're allowing evil to grow and prosper. There are people who are turning to the only places, the only people who will call this out and call it out for the evil that it is and admit who's doing it, these Muslim immigrants, and they're turning to some of these people are racists who are willing to say this. Not all of them, some of them are racist, and they're going to those people, and there some of these people are becoming racist themselves. You're creating the very boogeyman you say you oppose because you're cowards. You think racial tensions are gonna be better now than if you had addressed this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, Britain? No, they're so much worse now. It's just everything about this is so backwards. As Louise Casey's 2015 report on Rotherham Council found, this attitude was widespread. The Pakistani community accounted for around 3% of the town's population, and the story emerging was clear. Pakistani men were grooming white girls. As a result, one witness said the council was terrified of the impact on community cohesion, end quote. Across the town, pressure was put on people to, quote, suppress, keep quiet, or cover up, end quote. Issues around child abuse. A former senior officer told her review that so and so didn't want the town to become the child abuse capital of the North. They did not want riots. Guess what? If you're the child abuse capital of the North, you're still the child abuse capital of the North, whether people know it or not, whether the media knows it or not. And actually, you're just going to allow it to continue. You're going to continue to be the child abuse capital of the North. Politicians were terrified of the impact on community cohesion. This nervousness meant that there was a quote sense that it was the Pakistani heritage counselors who alone dealt with that community, with their having a disproportionate influence on the council. As one witness put it, quote, my experience of council as it was and is, Asian men were very powerful, and the white British are very mindful of racism and frightened of racism allegations. So there is no robust challenge, end quote. Other concerns may have been even more sinister. In 2000, oh, hold on one second. Sorry about that little interruption, guys. I appreciate you hanging with me. Tiger not only likes to bark at mailman, he also likes to bark at the plumber. So he's letting me know that he's here. Oh, I'm so sorry. John says my story is so good. I thought Tiger was in my hallway. Yeah, look at this little dog. He's got his sweater on too because it's cold. He's look at him. Look at how this little dog makes all of that noise. He's like the loudest. Kara says you came back with a dog. We are winning. Okay, we should take a break just for a second because it's such a heavy topic anyway. I look at his sweater. So when he wears this, my brother sent him this years ago. This is kind of an old sweater now, but he loves it when it's cold. And yeah, I feel like it's such a upper class, crusty looking sweater. Like, doesn't he look like he should own a yacht or be wearing those yacht shoes? When he wears this, we call him Pendleton or Reginald, because he looks so fancy. Are you gonna be quiet? Are you gonna be quiet? Okay, he's gonna sit with me. Pendleton. Also, the way he talks. If you guys have dogs, I don't know if you do this or if your spouse does this, but Tiger has a voice. And when I met my husband, he was like, "No." I used to think Tiger had a British accent, and my husband said, "No." And he's got this high pitched voice. He kind of sounds like Towley from South Park, and we both do his voice. But when he wears this sweater, suddenly he becomes British. He's got the fancy accent. Tiger Reginald III. That's right, Twee Girl. Okay. Alan Scott says, let's be honest, he probably considers Keri the help. Oh, he does. My dog is so. When I was growing up, I grew up in the South in the US, and I grew up in like not in a big city, in a little town, like 1,000 people maybe. And we had so many dogs. We were just like, in the country we would have like 8 or 9 dogs. We also lived at a dead end road, so they all lived outside. There was no fence. They just lived outside. The woods were all around. They would go in the woods and they did what they wanted. Um, and we until later we got one dog that was allowed in the house, and he was the only dog we ever had who was a full breed. He was a Dachshund, and he came with paperwork. And my mom really wanted to give him a fancy name because he had papers. And like our other dogs were named like Cookie and Blackie and Rusty. Okay, so this fancy dog, this is like a redneck idea of what's a fancy dog name. She named him Michelangelo Einstein. And he lived in the house, but all the others lived outside. And I was just thinking about that recently with the cold weather because I've gotten to a place in my life with Tiger. I could never imagine him living outside. I came from the country where that's where dogs live, but now I'm like, no way. Like, he lives in the house. He's got like doggy blankets and beds, and he's so freaking pampered, this dog. He's a little baby. He does order me around. Well, okay. Davina says, dogs who drink their tea with their pinkies raised. That's totally him. That's what he's like. Eric, Helpful Finger. Thank you for the super chat for $10. Eric says, it's odd how the anti-racist assume an investigation. Oh, we read this one. Assume an investigation into assault gangs means black and brown people, perpetrators only. Yes. Jardum. Thank you, Jardum, for the super chat for £5. Says, I don't know how much more the indigenous population of my country can take. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, this seems like the UK is maybe finally ready for its own reckoning. Trump won bigly. Trump won bigly this time around. In Canada, Trudeau's party was taking a walloping and was set to be trounced, and so he stepped down. I don't know what's about to happen in the UK. If you're in the chat and you're in the UK, like Jardum, tell me, what is the temperature there? Like, what are people thinking? What are people on the street? Are people waking up from this woke mind virus there? Are people done with it? Are they tired of being held captive and out of fear of being incorrectly called racist? Like, what's going on? I feel like it's time for the UK to, like Canada, to grow some balls. Okay. B. Ellen, have you named your raccoons? No, no. I know that Floral from Under a Rock, that channel with the puppets, they've named one of my raccoons Rocky, but I don't name them, no, because they're leaving. They don't need names. We're getting it. We're getting the raccoons out of here. Hey, Brahma Bull, good to see you. Brahma Bull's here. You guys go check out Brahma's political show, The Bullpen. I know I say this, but I do. I want, now that it's the new year, Brahma, I want to find a time to come back on your channel. I had so much fun hanging out with you guys. He says the West needs to figure it out before Western civilization is overrun. Yeah, because there's a lot to fix, right? I mean, this whole child exploitation scandal in the UK is a great example of what I was talking about earlier when they say, oh, it's conspiracy theories. They're so ludicrous. It would take so many people being involved, and how would that be possible? Well, this is a great example. This has been going on for over 30 years in multiple cities, 50 towns and cities in the UK. Thousands of girls in each of these towns and cities abused. How many tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of government employees, media figures, social workers, police kept their mouths shut? That's a lot to fix. It's a lot of people to fire. That's a lot of people to prosecute, to hold accountable. Are they up for it? Okay. I'm going to get back to this. We're almost done with this article. This is a really heavy article, I know. I'm going to back up to the beginning of this paragraph. Here we go. So, politicians were terrified of the impact on community cohesion. This nervousness meant that there was a, quote, sense that it was the Pakistani heritage counselors who alone dealt with that community, with their having a disproportionate influence on the council, as one witness put it. Quote, my experience of council as it was and is that Asian, I put that in quotes, Asian men were very powerful, and the white British are very mindful of racism and frightened of racism allegations, so there is no robust challenge, end quote. Other concerns may have been even more sinister. In 2016, it was reported that a victim of grooming in Rotherham had alleged that she was raped by a town councillor. Yeah, this is what I was talking about. How many of the people ignoring this took part in it? As a result of this combination of factors, the council went to great lengths to, quote, cover up information and silence whistleblowers. In the words of witnesses, if you want to keep your job, you keep your head down and your mouth shut. This resistance to an obvious truth repeated itself across the country. By 2010, a West Midlands police report showed that authorities were aware that grooming gangs were approaching children at school gates. They were going to the school. But as the report stated, quote, the predominant offender profile of Pakistani Muslim males, combined with the predominant victim profile of white females, has the potential to cause significant community tensions, end quote. It's racism, but it's the kind of racism that we say is not possible. It's exploitation of children, sexual exploitation of children. But it would be a bad look for us to notice it or do anything about it. As a result, the report remained unpublished until released in response to Freedom of Information requests 5 years later. In Manchester, a 2019 report concluded that gangs were left to roam the streets, in part because officers were told to look elsewhere. One detective constable was quoted by a report as saying, quote, the offending target group were predominantly Asian, there's that word again, Asian males. And we were told to try and get other ethnicities. They were told to try. They're like, hey, so we got this roving gang criminal network of child sex exploitation ring operating with thousands of child victims, and most of the guys doing it are Pakistani and Muslim, and we need you to look really hard to try and scrounge up some white guys that we can arrest instead. Like, look elsewhere. Try to find somebody else who's a different race, different religion. Try to find a white person. It's laughable. It would be laughable, except this is real. Central government took a similar view. In 2020, the Home Office refused to release its research into grooming gangs, claiming that it would not be in the quote public interest to do so. Again, as I've said on this channel before, anytime they say public interest or common good or public good, like, be very skeptical. You're dealing with someone who's probably very evil. That's my experience anyway with people who use that phrase. They use it to push authoritarianism and to strip individual rights. And they also use it, or in an Orwellian way, to cover up things that they don't want the public to know about. They keep things quiet for the public interest, for the common good. They allow children to continue to be kidnapped and raped and tortured for decades for the public good, for the public interest. They strip people of their individual rights. They coerce medical procedures they want done on people. They fire people if they don't get vaccines for the common good, for the public good, in the public interest. They put masks on kids in the public interest. When it was finally released, it turned out to be a whitewash, a shoddy construction, which appeared to deliberately downplay the clear role that ethnicity played in the phenomenon. Now, they've totaled some numbers here in this Telegraph article. We're just going to look at a couple of these. A total of 7,365 sexual grooming offenses were recorded by forces in England and Wales in 2023 and 2024, more than any other year, and up 10.1% on the previous financial year. The increasing trend is likely due to better recording by police and increasing reporting by victims. That's what I was going to say, because it's so much more than this. We're talking about 1,000 in one town alone, 50 towns, and these are the ones that they know about. Think of all the girls who've tried to report it and been turned away by police or been arrested themselves for public intoxication. Police in England and Wales closed investigations into 6,785 incidents of sexual grooming over the 2023-24 financial year. The most common outcome, applying to almost a third of cases, 32% of cases, was for no suspect to be identified. Amazing. This share is down from 34.6% the previous year and 40% during the pandemic of 2020. So hey, I guess at least it's not 40% with no suspect identified. Now it's just 30 something. When people did try to raise the issue, they found themselves shouted down. In 2004, a Channel 4 documentary into abuse in Bradford was delayed after police forces warned the evidence of, quote, Asian men, there's the word again, Asian men, targeting young white girls could inflame racial tensions. That's what they really care about, right? One of the bleakest cover-ups emerged in Rochdale. 15-year-old Victoria Agoglia, a vulnerable child in care, died in 2003 when 50-year-old Mohammed Yaqub injected her with heroin. In the lead up to her death, a review published last year found that she had given authorities information that she was, quote, involved in sexual exploitation, alleged rape, and sexual assault requiring medical attention, end quote. None resulted in her rescue. She had reported it a year earlier. Across the town, girls as young as 12 were being raped by gangs. When the first convictions in Rokedale were handed down in 2012, the police and Crown Prosecution Service apologized. Oh, they apologized for failing to follow up on appeals for help. As former Labor MP for Kaylee Ann Cryer put it, the authorities were, quote, petrified of being called racist, and so reverted to the default of political correctness, end quote. As a result, despite a child telling the police that she had been raped and providing DNA evidence, no prosecution was ever brought. She gave DNA evidence. The sense that authorities believed that a full investigation would be more trouble than it was worth is widespread. Simon Danskuk, the former MP for Rokedale, has said that senior Labour politicians warned him against discussing, quote, the ethnicity of the perpetrators for fear of losing votes. You know what? These guys should be in prison. They shouldn't even be in your country. If they're immigrants and they've committed a crime, like these guys, why are you worried about whether they're going to vote for you or not? They should be in jail. They're rapists. Oh, I might not get the rapist vote. Today, dozens of offenders are still believed to be at large in the community. While fears over racial tensions and political correctness have left the state frequently unwilling to protect victims, the same concerns have seen attackers protected. As the Jay inquiry into Rotherham found in 2014, in at least 2 cases, fathers tracked down their daughters and attempted to remove them from the houses where they were being abused, and the police arrested the fathers. In other cases, child victims were arrested for, this is what I told you about earlier, for drunken, disorderly behavior. The children were arrested rather than the adult men that they were with. Small wonder that Jay found young people in the town believed that police, quote, dared not act against Asian youths for fear of allegations of racism, end quote. The protection of offenders may have gone further still. In at least one case, when a victim found the courage to go to the police, their abuser appears to have been tipped off. The police tipped off the rapist. You get what's happening here? This is, while still in the police station, one child received a text from her abuser informing her that he had her 11-year-old sister and that it was now, quote, your choice, end quote. The child chose not to go through with the complaint. These stories cover only a small number of towns. The broader picture, however, is clear. The consequences are clear too. No police officer or government employee has ever been imprisoned for their misconduct. That's incredible. At the very least, there are tens of thousands of people guilty of criminal negligence. At the very least, many of them probably could also be found guilty of aiding and abetting or even participating. Indeed, in Rotherham, the harshest sanctions faced by the police were written warnings. Even offenders have managed to dodge some of the consequences for their actions. Despite being stripped of British citizenship, the leader of a Rokedale grooming gang still lives among his victims despite being ordered to be deported. Wow. So they found him guilty. They stripped him of his citizenship. Like I said, they shouldn't even be there if he's an immigrant and he's committed this crime. So in this case, they did strip him of his citizenship, but they still let him live there. They didn't deport him. Still living among his victims. Why is he not in prison? Why is he in the country? Why is he still in that town? If Britain is to redeem itself for the grooming gang scandal, it needs to understand how it got things so terribly wrong. This begins with the attitude that protecting the image of a successful multicultural society matters more than the actual truth of that multicultural society. Isn't it isn't hard to see why councils panicked when confronted with the sheer scale of the abuse. As a recent study calculated, 1 in 73 Muslim men living in Rotterdam, were prosecuted for their involvement in these gangs from 1997 to 2016. This was an almost unsolvable problem for a society built on liberal principles. Even now, discussing primarily Pakistani heritage grooming gangs as primarily Pakistani heritage grooming gangs causes problems. IPSO waded in to censure Home Secretary Suella Braverman for this claim last year, citing deeply flawed Home Office research in its ruling. So the fathers get arrested when they go and take their minor children out of these gang rape houses. They get arrested. The children get arrested when their fathers take them out of these houses. And then anybody who tries to do anything like a home secretary, or even if they just acknowledge the reality of what's happening, hey, these are primarily Pakistani rape gangs, they get censured for saying that. And this concludes, if we can't be honest about the problems we're facing, we won't be able to address them. Obviously. It reminds me of the problem of there are many problems in the US that we can't fix because we're not allowed to say it or talk about it. One is our immigration problem. Fixing our immigration problem. All the illegal immigrants crossing the border every week. Another problem is black on black crime. You're not allowed to talk about it. You're not supposed to say it. You're not allowed to say it out loud. How are you going to fix it if you can't even identify it? This is just as I said at the beginning, a very heavy topic, and I appreciate you guys sticking around for this. Uh, Somebody in the chat asked, a bad dude named Corn Pop asked, what is IPSO? Thank you, Russ Williams, with the answer. It's the Independent Press Standards Organization. It's a far left quasi-governmental organization that regulates newspapers. Well, there are so many more articles I could cover about this today. I'm gonna try and get this wrapped up. We've been going a couple hours just because there's so many articles, because this has suddenly burst into the mainstream, and it's suddenly something that the UK is having to look at, and it's I think a brilliant example of someone who is the target of an evil and corrupt media, like Elon Musk happens to be, like Trump is. Any of the people that they hate and they just can't stop talking about and reporting on. It's a brilliant example of him taking that attention and turning it to something that needs attention. And they can't control this story anymore, as hard as they're trying. They're having to address it. The MP is having the prime minister, the PM is having to address it. I wanted to just show you some of the articles. Let me see, with the prime minister in them. This is what he's choosing to do. The prime minister. Look at this. He's doubling down. He's doubling down. That's why that article from the Free Press that said, his principles, should he ever find them. Well, he hasn't found them yet. You would think this would be an opportunity for him to be ashamed and to step forward and to say, we've had this massive problem and cover up, and the heads are going to roll, to stand up and be a man and say, this ends now on my watch. No, that's not what he's doing. He's trying to fight with Elon Musk in the press. He's trying to fight with Elon Musk and say and go back and fall back on that tired thing that they've been saying for decades, that this is overly sensationalized, that there are lies. These are lies. Look at these headlines. UK Starmer slams Musk lies, quote, lies on grooming gangs. PM attacks those spreading lies on grooming gangs. Hits back at Musk. That's what he's doing. Shameful. Shameful. I don't think it's going to work, though. I think there's too much attention on it now. And I think there's so much attention on it now that even people who are in the woke echo chamber, the mainstream echo chamber, like they're hearing about it now. I don't think they've had time to do all the damage control they want to do, and to they like to get ahead of things and to give the excuse ahead of time on why you should ignore this story that's coming out, and they haven't been able to properly do that. I mean, they have to the extent of saying, well, it's racist if you look at it, or you're Islamophobe if you look at it, but they haven't been able to properly like lay that out, and I don't think it's going to work. I think people are going to be reading this and going, what the heck is going on? It's kids, you know? I don't think it's going to work. If you're in the UK, let me know what you think. I'm very curious about what it's like there. I'm in the US, and this is the only news I'm seeing the past few days, which is very encouraging that there's this bright light being shown on this now. I imagine it's even more media attention there. Dion says the thing is that when normal people try and shine a light on this, it's like a candle, but Elon Musk is more like the sun. Yeah. He's like a lot of candles. That's the and actually, because a lot of that light is coming from the press themselves, focusing on him, and he just reflected it right onto something that he wanted them to talk about instead. Jardum says it's not making waves here. It's not? And you're in the UK? Wow. Is it making more waves here than there? Russ Williams, the UK media are seriously cucked. I wouldn't be so sure they're even covering this in any detail. It's not like on the, I imagine, front page of papers there with nothing but this. Am I wrong? Wow. Well, hey, share this video. I know it's a hard subject, but if there's somebody you think needs to hear about this, somebody in the bubble who doesn't know what's going on, maybe consider sharing this with them. Do a quick search. You can find tons of articles about it. It's all that's being talked about right now, at least in my world, my circles. That's all I'm seeing. Find something to share with them. Wow, Jordan says no, barely anything there in the UK. That is so incredible to me. England fears Twitter. Yeah. Okay. Then I'm going to keep posting about this myself. I kind of figured, oh, this is one of those things that's finally out in the open. Everyone's talking about it. But if not, like, I don't even know. Like, what can little old me do? I'll post more articles as they come out. Like, I don't know. I don't know. Simon Hunter says international embarrassment may cause change, but the issue needs to be kept being mentioned. It runs deep for decades. Yeah. Jardum for £5. Thank you, Jardum, for the super chat. Says there are estimates that there are a million uninvestigated events. I believe it. That number is, it seems very plausible. Okay, guys, I'm gonna wrap it up. I appreciate you being here. I know this was a heavy subject, but I thought it was this is one that was worth speaking on. I didn't want to talk about it on Friday because I didn't have enough time to do a lot of reading about the new all the news that's been breaking around it. And so I saved it for today. I appreciate you sticking in for a heavy topic. At least you got to see my doggy in the middle. And um oh Jason M. Hey Jason, good to see you. He says, hey Keri, Trudeau is finished. I know, I talked about at the top. He stepped down. What a snaky snake. What a sneaky do you guys know that song, Sneaky Snake? I think it's a Tom T. Harding song. What a sneaky snake that man is. I'm very happy for you guys in Canada. Although I think it would have been more satisfying for you if he'd been trounced in the next elections. But yeah, congratulations, says Surly Unicorn. Congratulations, Canada. Okay. So I have an interview. I mentioned it on Friday. It's in the can. I'm just editing it. I'm adding a little more graphics and stuff to it about things we talked about than I usually do in my interviews. So it's not coming out tomorrow. I was going to try to get it out early and put it out tomorrow. It's going to come out on my usual release day for interviews. It's going to come out on Thursday. I will have a link for it up tomorrow. And I'm very excited about this interview. It's one of the most interesting conversations I've had in a while. And it was it's with Mikhail Olson, who's a Christian writer. He writes for the Federalist. He's a podcaster, and we were talking about whether or not the woke right is a thing. And if it is a thing, do you like the phrasing? You know, all that's a separate question. All that. What are people talking about when they refer to the woke right? Is this a problem that is bubbling up or not? And how is it affecting, if at all, the church? Is it a threat to the church? And like I said, I could have talked to this guy forever. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation, especially if you're someone who's skeptical about there being such a thing as the woke right, which used to just be called neo-Nazis or alt-right. But if you're skeptical, I really want to hear from you. So it'll be out on Thursday, and tomorrow, Wednesday. I don't think we have a show for tomorrow. I think what we're doing is Brahma Bull still here? I think we're going to be doing that Christian panel. Um, let's see. Maybe it is tomorrow. I got to look at my calendar. Not tomorrow, but Wednesday. Wednesday the 8th. Yes, we are. We're doing a Christian panel on Wednesday the 8th. We are. And we're going to be reviewing the movie Homestead, which is in theaters now. It's a new Angel Studios release. So if you haven't seen it yet, yes, thank you, Brahma Bull. Thanks for helping me out. I got 2 new gig jobs going on, and my schedule's all messed up in my head about what I'm doing each day. I got to go back and do another gig right now. So, anyway, Wednesday, if you want to see the movie before we talk about it, it's in theaters and it looks to be a really exciting, entertaining one. It's Angel Studios release, and it's about a post-apocalyptic society and people fighting over a homestead, and it looks like, at least in the preview, sort of a survivalist camp that they're fighting over. I love post-apocalyptic films, so I'm excited to see it before Wednesday. So we're going to be talking about it then. We'll see you then. Okay, take care, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.